Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. For the record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
For the record. For the record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning to everyone. Today is August 3rd, 2015. This is the steamy part of the year, quite humid, not a whole lot of rain. I think the weather report tells us today we should expect a 30% chance of showers. That is really not a high percentage, so I would say to you, be prepared for another scorcher again today. But what would a perfect island like the Cayman Islands be without hot weather? You know, it wouldn't be a tropical island, and we certainly do love it and enjoy it here. I want to thank all of you who are tuned in this morning listening to us, whether or not you're following us locally or if you're following us overseas via the web. I am your host, Orit Connor, and of course, For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. You, our listening audience, are welcome to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. on For the Record. You can also participate in our program by calling us on our toll-free number, which is provided courtesy of Lime. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. And of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, you can email us at fortherecord. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. And of course, For the Record would not be possible without our dedicated, committed sponsors. And For the Record is brought to you by Finance and Corporate Services Cayman, also known as FinCor. FinCor provides superior accounting and bookkeeping services to small and medium-sized businesses. They are located at Unit Number 9 in Paddington Place on Godfrey Nixon Way in Georgetown. Their telephone numbers are 746-9272 or 325-8849. You can also check them out at www.fincor.ky. FinCor, they are client-focused, technology-driven, and cost-effective. And of course, For the Record is also brought to you, sponsored by Digicel Top Up. You can send minutes to your loved ones in Jamaica from a Digicel retail location or top-up kiosk, and they will receive double credits plus 7 free days of data when you send $20 or more to them. Let's take a look at the local scene for a minute. Things seem to be pretty quiet this weekend. Nothing too dramatic. I think we saw a case of a street robbery. No serious accidents that we heard about. There may have, I think there was a motor vehicle as well as a motorcycle accident sometime last week in West Bay. We hope that the victims of that accident, that they're doing quite well. Let's look on the international scene for a minute. Those of you Canadians who are here or living here, or Caymanians who have connections with Canada, Canada's Prime Minister has called a parliamentary election for the 19th of October. He has asked the Governor General, David Johnson, to dissolve the parliament, and elections will take place on the 19th of October. Certainly calling elections earlier, normally when that is done. Sitting administration usually feels fairly confident that they can win the election. Of course, the conservative government there in Canada has been ruling with a coalition, and they're hoping that that coalition will continue to survive. What is interesting about Canada is that during the financial downturn caused by the real estate market and everything else, Canada seemed to have weathered the storm during that period, and their economy was doing pretty well. Now we're seeing a completely different trend. They also have concerns about security issues, and their economy is pretty sluggish at the moment as well. They have seen setbacks, for instance, in the price of oil that has hurt them also. So Mr. Harper wants to prop up his government again and see exactly how the electorate will respond to him at this point in time. So that election in Canada will take place on, as I said, the 19th of October of this year. Now, let's go back to one of the reasons that For the Record is on this morning. You would have heard on Friday that we indicated that we would have the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, and her support staff with us this morning to discuss the ongoing consultations in relation to labor and pensions. And I am happy to say that we have in the studio with us this morning the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs. I think we can still call him the Director of Labor and Pensions, Mr. Mario Ebanks, even though the last time when he was on the show, I sort of like tried to pull out of him where he was going to be going, and we now know that he's going to be working with the Airports Authority in their human HR in an HR capacity with them. And we also have Miss Amy Wollaston, and she is with the ministry at this point in time, yes. I think, inside the ministry.
I'm seconded to the ministry, yes.
Okay. So, Minister Rivers, good morning and welcome back to For the Record. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope you all had a great weekend.
Yes, it did. Thank you very much. And good morning to you, Mr. Connor, and good morning to the listening and viewing public. And I just want to begin the session before we get into today's discussion. Will really primarily focus on the National Pensions Amendment Bill, because we haven't had an opportunity to have this discussion with you in detail on this particular bill. But I wanted to, first of all, say a big congratulations to all of our very special athletes who've just completed their participation in the World Special Olympics Games that was just held in Los Angeles. I think we did fantastic in terms of our own medaling, for the likes of Matthew Ebanks and Jordan McLean and others who actually medaled wild overseas. But for all those athletes that just participated and gave their best, I wanted to say a big congratulations. And I am so proud and so thrilled that they were over there representing the Cayman Islands in that capacity.
And they return on Tuesday, I believe.
I believe so, yes. I believe they return this week. So hopefully they'll have a good contingent of people going out there to support and welcome them back home.
Yes.
Because I think they did a fantastic job, and they certainly made me proud, and I'm sure many people in the community as well.
Okay, Miss Amy, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm fine.
Pleasure
Glad
to be
see
here.
You here. Glad to have you here as well. And Mr. Mario, good morning, sir, and welcome back.
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for having us. Appreciate that.
Okay. Well, Minister Rivers, I'm going to hand it straight over to you, because I know our listening audience are certainly quite eager to hear about the consultations and everything else. And, first of all, I must say that certainly a change in direction in terms of allowing these consultations to take place to ensure that you get the sufficient feedback and reaction from all of those who will be affected by any new legislation.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for recognizing that, OC. I think it certainly was important, from the government's perspective, and especially myself as minister with responsibility for these particular pieces of legislation, that we actually did hear from the community. I mean, the government has come out with the consultation bills, which signifies and indicates the kinds of policy and other changes that we feel is necessary. However, it is both of these bills, by and large, large are still a work in progress to some degree. And so we want to hear from the public with respect to their views that we may not have captured to date with respect to what's reflected in the current bill. So that's certainly the purpose of having these very extensive public consultation activities. And of course, the public consultation activities span from district meetings in every district to discuss both the Labour Relations Bill, which we've just wrapped up last month in terms of the public meetings, that is. And now we are kicking off the round of district meetings for the National Pensions Amendment Bill. And we can go into some details as to what and when those meetings will take place during the coming weeks. But also, obviously, through mediums such as this, the talk shows, the call-in programs, hearing directly from the public is an important part of the public consultation process. We also have a dedicated email address to receive written feedback from persons who may not necessarily feel comfortable having their say in person or vocally at the meeting, so they can write into the ministry at lpl@gov.ky, and they can send their comments, as extensive as they'd like, to the ministry directly. And of course, access to the bill can be found on the ministry's website at www.education.gov.ky/Labour Pensions, Labour spelt the English way. So I think that, with respect to us really taking the initiative to hear from the public, we've really tried to be as extensive and comprehensive as possible, giving as many avenues to persons to be able to have their say and to shape the legislation, basically the governing entity and the way that pensions will be regulated, will be carried out in the future, will largely depend on the kind of feedback that we receive from the public during this process. And of course, the government ultimately will have a decision as to what changes need to be made before we actually finalise the bill to be presented to the House later in the year.
And speaking of those meetings, I think one is due to take place tonight, first one.
That's correct.
At the
North side.
North Side,
Right.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yes,
Mr. Evans.
Wasi, thank you very much. We, as the Minister mentioned, we crisscrossed the country, as it were, last month with the Labour Relations Bill. And then before that, the Minister and her team were out crisscrossing the country on the Education Bill as well. So last month we did, we started out in West Bay, and we went to North Side, went to Cayman, and in Cayman we did Labour and Pensions. Then we went to Bodden Town, Georgetown, and ended up in East End on the 23rd of July. Now tonight we start the National Pensions Amendment Bill public consultation. But before I go to that, we also met with the Chamber of Commerce, the Be Informed series. We didn't meet with them. They had a session we attended. We also attended a breakfast session. The Minister was there and made a presentation with the Human Resources Professional Association or Society. We also met with the Ministers Association, the churches and charitable organizations, and we received a lot of good feedback from all of those initiatives. So tonight, all roads lead to North Side, as they say, and we're going to be at the North Side, the Record Aug Bank Civic Centre at 8 p.m. Now, we didn't have a great turnout for the Labour Relations Bill in North Side, so hopefully tonight we'll have a overflowing Record Aug Bank Civic Centre at 8 p.m. tonight, Monday the 3rd of August. And then Thursday this week, we go to Savannah Primary School Hall. And then next week as well, we continue to Monday, East End, Wednesday at the Shirley Kidd Memorial Hall at the Sir John A. Cumber Primary School in West Bay. And then we end up next week, Thursday the 13th, in Georgetown Town Hall. So opportunities for a lot of people to come out and listen, give their feedback, engage the Minister, and to ask questions.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Orit Connor, and my guest in studio with me this morning, we have the Honorable Tara Rivers, the Minister who has constitutional responsibility for education, employment, and gender affairs. We have Ms. Amy Wollaston, with us, who has been seconded over to the ministry. She was previously in pensions.
Yes, I I am
Superintendent of Pensions, right? And we have Mr. Mario Ebanks, who's jack of all trades. He's still with the ministry, even though he'll be moving on to another role with another government entity. But he has also been piloting or assisting in piloting these pieces of legislation as well. So it is good that they have kept you on during that period. Please stay tuned. We're going to a commercial break, and when we come back, we will continue with our discussions. Morning and welcome back to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorrit Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, Ms. Amy Walston, and Mr. Mario Ebanks. And we're talking about the consultations, the district meetings in relation to the National Pensions Amendment Bill 2015. I am sure that we will also speak about the labor amendment bill as well, because we've seen some of the headlines in the news in relation to that, and some of the feedback that you have gotten in relation to that. We saw the reaction when the chamber had their meeting. Hugh Moses did a presentation in relation to it. So at some point in time, hopefully we can talk about that too as well, Minister.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I certainly, as the director said, the members from the ministry attended the Be Informed session at the chamber. I myself wasn't there presently at the actual meeting itself. So, of course, the director will be able to kind of have a more fruitful discussion if necessary to talk about the presentation.
Certainly, but our main focus is going to be on pensions this
yes,
morning.
I think it's important because we obviously, I mean, we're the public consultation period for both the pensions amendment bill as well as the labour relations bills closes on the 31st of August. So obviously, even though our round of public consultation with respect to public meetings has concluded for the labour bill, the public consultation period is still ongoing. So we're still welcoming suggestions, welcoming comments, and we will be looking at the end of August then to collate all of this information and kind of look at where the comments are for each of the bills respectively, and then look to refine the relevant bills before taking them forward. So certainly we do welcome consultation on both bills until the end of this month. So I think it is important that people recognize that we still have another month to go. But before you know it, the month is over. So we've given over 60 days for both pieces of legislation. So I think that it has been quite, the time has been generous in the sense that people have had an opportunity to have their say. And I know people are taking advantage of that opportunity as well. So we want to say thank you for those of you that see the benefit in going through this exercise. And we appreciate it from the ministry's perspective. And of course, the government wants to hear what you have to say. But certainly, as I said, don't sleep on it, and that, don't come the 29th of August and asking for more time, because we really do need to have the process wrapped up in a timely fashion so we can then turn towards doing whatever amendments as may be necessary to the legislation in order to bring it forward in a timely fashion for it to be adopted and put in force.
So, for instance, tonight now at the meeting, what are we to expect? If you go there and you don't find that you get a lot of feedback from people, but at the same time you would want to put certain points forward as well, in particular highlight those salient portions of the bill, as well. So let's pretend this morning that we're at a district meeting.
At a district meeting.
Yes.
Okay, so the first, so during the district meeting, of course, I will have the technical team who are really there to add support and to be able to kind of fill in some of the more detailed blanks about how, the regime is administered and some of the issues, etc., that, what we're trying to address in the changes to the legislation. So I will be leading the discussion with giving an overview of the various sections of the bill which have that reflect the changes, either amendments to current sections of the current national pensions bill or introducing new provisions to the bill. So unlike the labour relations bill, which is an actual, it will replace and repeal the current labour law, This amendment bill is just that. It amends the current national pensions law, so it'll still be national pensions law. However, there will be some significant amendments to certain sections in the law itself. So we'll give an overview as to what those changes will be. We also we'll start with, and I'll start with now too, talking about some of the objectives. Why do we find it was necessary to make these changes to the pension regime at this time? It's important to recognize that similar to the national or the labor law, the national pensions law has not had any significant amendments or revisions from a kind of comprehensive review since it was enacted in the late 1990s. And so there have been some kind of specific discrete changes to the law, the most recent ones being the pension holiday of 2010, and then in 2011 the ability to make some specific withdrawals as it relates to housing. So those are the two most recent changes to the pensions law. So this now is an attempt to look at some of the areas that, given that we've had pensions now for, going on 20 years, where are some of the sticking points that the department was finding that needed to be addressed in order to address some of the changing dynamics in the society, so to speak, in order to make the pension regime more robust, in order to increase the ability for proper compliance and enforcement of the laws, etc. So really the objectives of the amendments is to reorganize or to have the law mirror what is in actual fact the reorganization of pensions and labor in the Cayman Islands. We now have a Department of Labor and Pensions, which didn't exist when the law was first introduced. So the law still refers to the National Pensions Office, which has now been amalgamated with the department or within the Department of Labor and Pensions. So it needs to reflect the reality in that regard. It also aims to increase the requirements for pension plans to educate and inform their members. So actually putting positive obligations on pension plan administrators to actually keep their members informed about what's happening with their pensions was an important improvement to this particular piece of legislation. It also seeks to introduce new and enhanced mechanisms to improve compliance. As we said, there is some issues with compliance that have been highlighted over the years, most recently in the Office of the Complaints Commissioner's own motion investigation, penny pinching pensions, which she outlined a number of challenges as it relates to compliance of pensions. And so the bill looks to address some of those concerns that she highlighted, and recommendations have also been incorporated into this draft bill to address that issue of lack of compliance with the regime. It also looks to increase the age at which people become entitled to pensions. So moving it from 60 to 65, which recognizes, again, the longevity of people living in the Cayman Islands. I think the average age now is estimated at 83 years old. So we still have a long way to go, hopefully, on average. And so the legislation looks to try to address that. And of course, you would have remembered the similar change that was made in relation to the Labour Relations Bill as well, to reflect the 65 years of age. Right. And finally, the kind of key objective is to alter the eligibility criteria in order to create equity and consistency for all pensionable employees. Currently, there is a bit of a disparity between when Caymanians versus non-Caymanians need to start to pay pensions, and so we wanted to level that playing field, so to speak. So we have made some adjustments to that particular criteria as well. And so tonight we will have that kind of broad overview of each of the sections. I'm happy to go into detail of that now if you'd like, or if you have specific questions that you would like to
No, at this point in time you can go right into that. We have about 4 more minutes, so you can start there, Minister.
Okay. Well, so with that broad overview of the key objectives of why we felt it was necessary to address this kind of comprehensive look at the pension legislation, one of the first things we felt we needed to address was the definition of employee. And in this regard, the definition of employee has been amended to exclude persons who work less than 15 hours per week. Now, this is to reflect a kind of policy consideration or a policy decision that was taken by the government as a way to reduce the cost of employment for businesses when employing individuals on a limited time frame per week. It's also an attempt to alleviate the costs that individuals themselves, that employees themselves experience with respect to those who work on a part-time basis to basically try to increase their take-home pay as it relates to not having to now be required to pay pension deductions for their nominal wages. And we felt that, especially in this climate where, the employment was a bit of a challenge and people were instead of finding steady, regular, full-time employment, some persons were either being offered or were able to kind of pick up the part-time employment. We wanted to try to stimulate that particular activity. So people were, even if they're in between jobs, so to speak, and they're not able to actually gain full-time employment, we didn't want certain things to be an obstacle for them to actually engage or receive part-time employment, at least for in the interim until they either move to full-time employment or otherwise. And so we felt that in considering a number of factors that may be seen as a barrier, we've introduced this ability now to for persons who work less than 15 hours a week to be considered part-time and therefore able to or at least not part-time, because there's a part-time definition in the Labour Relations Bill, and I don't want to confuse the two. So anybody working less than 15 hours a week, so the more, not full-time employment would not be required once this bill, of course, becomes law. That is not the case currently. So, it's important that we, employers still adhere to the current requirements of the law, but this is a proposal that's put forward in this particular bill.
So that would be they would be fall into a category of persons, or would this be a situation where you normally are fully employed but your work hours may be reduced? How would it work?
No, it would be more in line with your first comment about the category of employees.
Okay.
Because it's envisioned that, I don't want to use the word part-time because labor explains part-time, but casual, I guess maybe. It's envisioned that a person who works less than 15 hours per week, as the minister explained, we want to make sure that that person is still getting the opportunities of employment. They might not be able to obtain full-time employment in this economy. So in establishing this new definition, that way the person gets to take home a large amount of salary, right? But at the same time, the business also benefits. They don't have to pay any pension contributions. So it's kind of a balance between the two.
Excellent. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I am your host, Art Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, we have the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs. We also have with us Ms. Amy Wollaston and Mr. Mario Ebanks. We're going to time check. Then we'll go to the news. After the news, we will be back to continue this discussion. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record, which is brought to you by FinCor as well as Digicel Top Up. We're here talking to Minister, the Honorable Tara Rivers, who has constitutional responsibility for education, employment and gender affairs, and also with us is Ms. Amy Wollaston, who's been seconded to the ministry, as well as Mr. Mario Ebanks. Before we get back to the main discussion, for those of you who may not be able to make the meetings or may not have access to the documents that we're discussing, certainly on the website, and I'll have Ms. Amy give you the information. There are opportunities, there are ways for you to be able to access either the whole document if you don't want to read the whole document, to get the relevant parts of it. Ms. Amy, can you let our listening audience know what they can do, please?
Sure. The website is www.education.gov.ky/labor pensions. On that site, you'll find the summary notes, as well as, which is basically a summary of the key changes that are there, as well as the more detailed document, which we call the amendment bill. And that provides the public with the opportunity, if they want to read the more comprehensive, detailed information, that's there. And if they want to read something more concise, then they can choose between the two.
Okay, Minister, back to you to lead us.
Yeah, so I just you asked a question. I think we need to make sure we clarify fully about the application of the 15 hours or less than 15 hour now proposed exclusion for purposes of pension. Just kind of looking at the fact that this the actual draft bill does speak to persons who are consistently employed for less than that period of time, and I'll ask the director to kind of give us a bit more color to that in just a minute. But just looking kind of more broadly, I mean, this when we looked at, say, other jurisdictions that have similar pension regimes to the Cayman Islands, we discovered that, say, for instance, Bermuda has a similar exclusion, but they do it on an annual aggregated number of hours basis. So I don't remember the exact number, but I think it is over 700 hours if you work for a period of time less than a certain threshold, you don't have to pay pensions. When we thought about how we would introduce it in our legislation, we felt that doing it on a weekly basis versus the cumulative annual basis would have been an easier process to administer. And so we chose the recommendation of doing it less than 15 hours per week. But again, there is some qualifying language that will make it apply to only certain types of employees that fall into this category. And I'll ask the director just to kind of discuss that in a little bit more detail.
Steve Banks?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as the minister mentioned, the 15 hours per week is to stimulate employment for certain categories of persons, not to penalize employers of those persons, and also to encourage or to enable those persons to take home a bit more pay. But the bill does say, in the definition of employee, it does not include a person who is consistently employed for less than 15 hours per week. So that would be for persons that are working maybe another job, and then they have a part-time job that they're working 12 hours a week or whatever. Or, for example, individuals who work and they go out on the side of the roads in the morning to sell the newspapers or other magazines, or to do some promotional work or whatever. Those kinds of individuals. But we want to make sure that we don't create a loophole in this, but also, as the minister mentioned, to stimulate employment and not penalize persons that have another job and have sufficient income to survive on, and also have other pension arrangements.
Okay. Minister, I don't know if we want to continue on this train of thought, but when we look at the link and the summary notes there are some really significant points that are there. For instance, it talks about the introductory part of it, as well as, for instance, talks about fines, talks about introducing the requirements for the director to publish notices of each pension plan registered along with key services. Are we going to be able to get into some of this?
Yeah,
this
well,
morning?
that's the intention is
Excellent.
for us to kind of go through some of these changes and discuss and stop and have a discussion as you see fit in that regard.
Okay.
So another major, like I said, I won't go through the age rate, raising. We've already dealt with that, 65. That and coupled with the increase in the year's maximum pensionable earnings from $60,000 currently to $87,000 a year is an attempt to address what is considered to be an important aspect of pensions, which is to have sufficient income replacement upon retirement. And so currently we have $60,000 a year as the cap. So anything over $60,000, you don't have to pay pensions on. We have introduced a raise in that cap to $87,000 a year, and that really reflects the report that was done back in 2007. The government of the day commissioned a report by Mercer Consulting through a competitive bid processing process, I understand. And in 2007, a report was done that really looked at the pensions regime from legislation, from investment, as well as regulation. And so they at the time recommended an increase to this cap to $72,000 a year, but that again was in 2007. So we asked the Economics and Statistics Office to give us the inflation adjusted amount for today's figure in 2015, and so $87,000 is what they recommended. So we have actually increased that cap. So in addition to paying more in terms of pensions, plus the longer time in which you are able to contribute to pensions before your actual pension entitlement, that will increase the income replacement ratio for those persons upon retirement. And so what the kind of figure that's been put out by the experts as being reasonable is anywhere between 60 to 70% of your pre-retirement income is where you want to be aiming for. That will, of course, will depend. Individual circumstances may mean that some persons will have much higher, some persons may have lower, depending on their investment strategy outside of pensions or otherwise. But with the combined increase on the pensionable age, 65, plus the cap for the amount that you would be you have to pay pensions on, that puts our income replacement ratio anywhere between 57 to 78%, which is well within the range that is the ideal for developing countries. So again, it's a way to make sure that people are able to retire and still have a quality of life that largely reflects the quality of life that they had prior to retirement. And the expectation is that upon retirement, you'll have less obligations, such as, dependent obligations for young children and otherwise, as well as mortgage and whatnot. So that, your earning power in terms of your income replacement through pensions wouldn't necessarily need to be 100% of what you used to make pre-retirement, because, of course, you have more obligations when you're younger and you're working and whatnot. So that's the kind of rationale. So those two are significant attempts at making sure that people become less and less dependent on the state, because they're able to support themselves in a way that gives them an ability to have a quality of life.
Mr. Ebanks and Ms. Walson, do we have a difficulty still convincing people that you really need to put aside money for your retirement, that you really need to have that? Like the minister said, you can't continue to rely on the state to support you, and as life expectancy increases, you live longer, means that you're going to need to have more money to be able to support yourself during that period of time. Do we still have a difficult time convincing people that they need to do that?
Go ahead.
Sorry. Unfortunately, some people consider paying pension contributions as if they're paying a tax, which it's not going to the government, it's going to a pension plan. The account is held in the name of the individual, and at the appropriate time, that person is able to access those funds. Okay. So unfortunately, people do consider it that way. But just going back to some of the things the minister was talking about, one of the changes that she's going to get to is about additional voluntary contributions as well. So just to explain, so we're increasing the year's maximum pensionable earnings, but we're also allowing people to access their additional voluntary contributions. And the way the law works now, you can't access those until retirement. But the provisions in the amendment bill explain that you will be able to access them prior to retirement. Why that's important is because now people have an avenue to put additional money into their pension plan so they can save further than the 10% the law requires, right? But then they'll still be able to access it before they retire. So if they have an emergency and they need the funds, it's possible to get it. But if they don't, then that's an avenue to save more for your retirement. So therefore, to increase the amount of money available to you when you get to retirement.
And those persons who complain that their funds, their pension fund, is not performing the way that they would like to see it, and most people at the end of the day that you will speak to will say, I'm getting much less than what than what I put in, or the value of it has decreased. Do we address those concerns that people have as well?
Well, I mean, the investment strategy and the investment rules and requirements is contained in the investment regulations, which isn't actually reflected in this particular bill. But just to let you and the public know, we're also looking at making amendments to those regulations as well to address some of the concerns about, the return on investment. But what this bill does do is to put requirements to be more transparent with how and what's happening with the pensions. So therefore, people can be kept abreast of what is happening. They can be a bit more vigilant to keep an eye on things. But also, it also puts the administrators on notice that they need to also be more accountable to the members of which they're managing their money. So that combined with some of the changes that will need to be made with respect to the investment regulations, which is in a separate piece of legislation, which will be coming forward shortly as well. But we are looking at making some amendments to try to enhance the ability to get these kind of returns on investment, but also making sure that there are checks and balances in place that would be appropriate depending on the nature of the pensioner as well.
Thanks for that. I know I threw you off course.
No, and that's fine. I know that's fine. I think it is an important question, and also, I think I'm glad that Amy did bring up the additional voluntary contributions, because that's certainly what I was going to get to next. But to answer your question directly, that is what we're putting forward in this bill to try to stimulate more savings from persons, because they don't feel like, okay, if I put my money towards my pensions and if I put more than I'm required to do so, that money will no longer be locked in. So in case, worst case scenario, there's a health emergency or some other emergency that will require them accessing those additional voluntary amounts, they can do so. But in the event that there isn't, then they can just use that as a way to increase their savings. But they'll know that, that comfort is there. Should they need to access it, they can now access it. Well, of course, once the bill then becomes law in that regard. But that is only as it relates to the additional voluntary amounts, right, not the mandatory 10% that is would still be only accessible upon retirement.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because I've had a great joy in the last 3 years to sign a lot of retirement savings arrangements, approvals for people who are going into full retirement or partial retirement. But I've also had significant agony by people who have come and they've had problems with health issues or their mortgages or bills or whatnot, and they want to access their pure pension money. And I've said, you can't do that, because that pension is for retirement, for when you need it the most. But if you have what we're talking about, the minister's talking about additional voluntary contributions, an additional pot that can be accessed by, through additional savings, that's certainly an attraction. I mean, we are, to go back to your question about having to convince people to save, we are really culturally not a savings community. We are more of a consumption-based community. And when the law was passed in the late 90s, the 10% contribution rate at $60,000 per year was basically the beginning, the phase-in amount. But that has not changed since 1998. And even though Mercer, I think Mercer, when they did their consultancy, they recommended a much higher rate. I think it's up around 20%. But of course, we can't do those kind of leaps and bounds. But it is a struggle, but we're getting there. And I think this bill, by putting additional voluntary contributions, will go a long way. And if we do things like proper investment performance reporting and monitoring, also monitoring the expense ratios to make sure that the administrators are not milking the plans and the people with fees, then I think we'll get there. And all that is included in this bill.
And certainly, with the financial environment that we have now, if you put your money into banks, you're not getting anything, out of there as well. So if you can certainly make a pension plan more attractive as a savings mechanism as well, that certainly will be helpful. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I am your host, Ort Connor, and my guests in the studio with me this morning, we have the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs. We also have with us Ms. Amy Wollaston and Mr. Mario Ebanks, and we're discussing the Pensions Amendment Bill that is out for a consultation, district meetings that are taking place starting tonight in the North Side, and we're encouraging you to get involved because it will affect almost every one of you out there. Please stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record, where I am your host and our guest in the studio with us, Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, Ms. Amy Wollaston and Mr. Mario Ebanks. We have one caller on the line. We're going to go straight to that caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Osei.
Good morning.
Good morning to the Minister and are you? And I didn't catch the name of the other.
Miss Amy Wollaston.
Okay. First of all, let me congratulate the minister. I think she's doing a good job.
Thank you.
Not everything I would like to see, but you're doing a good job. Anyway, what I want to talk about was, some time ago I was down at a grocery store, and this person, old lady, she was in her 50s then, 60s, whatever. Anyway, she's sitting outside on a bench, and I loved to see her. She was just a pleasant person, and she was there sitting there, tears in her eyes, crying basically, and talking about her pension. And I asked her what was wrong. She said, well, she's so upset because she had $20,000 in her pension, and she just found out she had 10 because something happened. Now, my question, this is what I want to put forward here, talking with pensions, everyone talking with pensions, but the pension managers, whoever they are, what responsibility do they have to make sure that they invest or put that money someplace where it's, instead of playing the stock market with people's pensions and then losing half their fund, should we be investing in things like bonds and stuff like that you have a guaranteed? You might make as much profit sometime, but you got a guarantee of so much money. And I think there has to be something looked into about that thing, because these fund managers don't seem to have any responsibility. I've never heard of anybody who's lost any of their money, had been repaid or reimbursed by the pension fund managers. And I think that's something that we got to look into, because poor people are the ones that suffer mostly from this stuff. They kind of depend on that pension to, when they get to that age. And I mean, it saddened me that this woman who'd worked so long and all of a sudden she had lost half of what she had put in the thing there. The other thing was that I was going to say that things like this thing about this idea that they had about pensions being taken out to build a house and all that, and then you find out that they got
save the mortgage program.
Yeah, save them. I thought that was, from the beginning, was not a good idea, because I knew what was going to happen. People would get the thing there, and then they wouldn't be able to take care of the mortgage, and then they're going to lose their houses and stuff like that. And these are some of the things that we have to really look into, especially because most of the people that suffer in these areas are Caymanians, older Caymanians, and some of them younger too. But we must have some sort of like a rule and regulations in these things that people just can't do with the money when they do get money to do. People get pension and they spend it. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, caller, for that. Who wants to take a lead on it?
Yeah. I'll just go and I'll get Simi to continue. I mean, the trustee and that caller who called that story about the woman with the $20,000 that became $10,000. I think last time we were on the show, or on the other show, he called as well. I mean, obviously we can't comment on that because we don't have the facts, but or the details. But the trustees are ultimately responsible to the beneficiaries of pension plans for the performance of the plans and for the delivery of solutions by their agents, whether they are investment managers, auditors, etc., etc. But the pension investment regulations have asset allocations that specify what kinds of investments pensions can invest in and what proportions. But typically they have a number of portfolios that they group the funds into a conservative portfolio, a balanced portfolio, and a growth portfolio. And so a conservative portfolio would be one that somebody who is nearing retirement, they'll put their money there. Somebody who is mid-age can go into a balanced portfolio, some growth, some conservative. But those young persons would typically go into a growth portfolio because they can take some risk, they can sustain some volatility in the market. But the case that the caller called about, it could have been someone who was in the middle of the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and where all the markets sustained severe trauma, and so people lost money. But if you were able to stay in, you regain that, which has happened now, except those who were near retirement, and if they were not in a conservative portfolio or they were unlucky, they would certainly have that kind of loss. But as the minister mentioned and Ms. Amy mentioned earlier, in the new bill, the investment performance reporting is going to help the regulators to watch those kind of things, and also the expense ratio monitoring as well. So there's a lot of good things in there that is going to help, and that situation that the caller called about will hopefully become a thing of the past. But I just want to say finally that he mentioned this Save the Mortgage program. That's totally separate from pensions. Pensions, we have something in the law that was done where you can get up to $35,000 for pay off a mortgage or to put down a down payment on a home or land. That's different, and that's been working quite well. It's a lot of work and a lot of red tape as well, but it's been working, and maybe it's something that is not pure pension, and it can cause some fallout for pension retirement at the end of the day, but it's also helping a lot of people to get a home that they may not been able to otherwise do.
In response to the caller, if I could just add, as the director spoke about, the trustees have a responsibility to all the members. And I would certainly encourage anybody who is unhappy, dissatisfied with their pension plan, that they need to raise that with their pension plan administrator. One of the changes that's actually contained in the amendment bill, which the minister will speak to, is the need for annual general meetings, so that members have an opportunity to meet with the key parties involved in their pension plan to discuss their concerns, to raise their questions, etc. Other things that are being brought forward as well is a comparison between the performance of pension plans, which is now not an apples to apples comparison and often not very transparent. But under the changes we are proposing, those things will be far more transparent, definitely in the public domain, so that people can make better informed decisions.
Okay, Minister, we're going to hand back over to you.
Sorry.
No.
And let me just add, the $35,000 provision in the law currently is not being changed or proposed to change in the amendment bill.
Okay.
Let me just add that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think, obviously between the director and Miss Amy, they've covered the key things about the increased transparency, increased reporting requirements to basically help the pensioners to understand, to know, to keep track of, and also again for pension plan administrators to also make sure that they keep their eye on the ball with what's happening with their portfolios. I won't necessarily go over those particular changes in any detail at this stage, but also to just highlight that the department will be now required to issue kind of an annual or publish, a list of registered pension plans in the country on an annual basis, just so people know who are the kind of legitimate plans that are out there that they can get involved with. Again, to make sure that there isn't any persons who may be operating in the jurisdiction illegally or otherwise. If anybody has any concerns, they can also refer to the Department of Labour and Pensions going forward to see who is actually registered and the like. There is also a new information requirement that's being introduced in this particular bill, which is to ensure that employers keep or cause to be kept proper books and records in relation to each pensionable employee, and that includes in having a list of the employees' names and employment dates, the list of their gross as well as net payments, so to track whatever payments have been paid, all pension deductions from employees' pay, as well as all pension contributions paid to pension plans. And again, this requirement for employers to just keep better records as it relates to their pension contributions on behalf of their employees will hopefully help to really deal with some of the compliance issues that the department was facing with respect to trying to get information from employers when they do their investigations and otherwise. And so now there is a positive obligation to have this better record keeping with respect to monies that are paid, monies that are deducted, and then monies that should be paid to pension contributions as well. And again, there is a penalty associated with not keeping these type of records, because again, we want to make sure that this is not just a requirement with no teeth, but if the department does do an investigation and find that these records aren't kept sufficiently, then the employer would be subject to a penalty in that regard.
Now, we have seen instances in the news where companies or individuals have been prosecuted as a result of not paying into pensions monies that they have deducted from their employees. How is that addressed in the proposed legislation?
The ability to prosecute employers will still remain in the legislation. One of the changes that is being proposed is to lengthen the statute of limitations so that it's not, the way it's currently calculated is it's 5 years from when it actually occurred. What we've changed it to is 7 years from when it's actually reported. That's rather significant because if someone comes forward with an issue that wasn't previously detected, it's just come to the department's attention the day they brought it in, but the statute of limitation might actually have passed. So this now facilitates the opportunity for further investigations to be taken. In addition, we've also added in a provision for regulations to be created to allow for administrative fines to be established, which would allow for the department to deal with issues of compliance without necessarily having to go through the court process.
Which is usually a prolonged situation for them.
Exactly. Let me just point out, though, that the fines that are in the legislation are also all being increased, and we've also added a provision in some cases for imprisonment. Now, those type of issues would be addressed when a matter is brought to court.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I am your host, Orit Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, we have the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, Ms. Amy Wollaston, and Mr. Mario Ebanks. We're discussing the Pensions Amendment Bill, which is of extreme importance to you. We're going to a commercial break. Please stay tuned and rejoin us afterwards because there's lots more that you need to hear and know about. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I am your host, Orit Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, Miss Amy Wollaston, who's been transferred over to the ministry, and Mr. Mario Ebanks. We're discussing the Pensions Amendment Bill, and if you think that retiring with a small amount of pension may be difficult, try retiring without any at all. That becomes even more difficult. So this is extremely, extremely important, for you to get involved in the discussion. Back to you, Minister.
Yeah, so there are a number of other provisions that deals with access to information and the increase of access to information. But we want to now turn our attention to some of the other salient and important changes that this particular bill puts forward. And as I talked about previously, in one of the objectives is to kind of level the playing field with respect to eligibility and initial eligibility criteria. So currently there is a discrepancy between when non-Caymanians have to start paying pension, which is after 6 months of continuous employment, after 9 months of continuous employment, whereas Caymanians need to start to pay pensions on day one. What we've done is we've introduced a change or an amendment that says no pension contributions for employees for the first 6 months of employment on the islands. So again, it's, for the first 6 months of, having employment on the island, that is irrespective of, whether you're Caymanian or non-Caymanian. And that, again, it does increase the consistency, and it also reflects the fact that, the Labour Relations Bill allows for a maximum initial period of 6 months for probation. So it does bring it in line with that kind of probationary period from the Labour Relations side. But again, it is also a way to try to avoid the kind of arbitrage that people may have when it comes to trying to make a determination as to who to hire. And so that we felt was an important change. But again, it is the language does qualify that it says, your first 6 months on island. So irrespective of your status or your nationality, that would then apply. That first 6 month grace period would apply. There is also a change to the benefits section, part 6, dealing with early retirement option, and there is a proposal that basically would allow members to claim early retirement, and there is an early retirement regime which is kept in this particular bill. The only thing is that the age range just shifts to accommodate the new 65 as being the pension entitlement age, but the mechanism still remains for accessing early retirement. But what the bill does do is to allow for persons to continue to, say, collect benefits even in the event of persons resuming employment. So if they resume employment, then their obligations to pay pensions would kick in as well. But they're also, and it is a way to, again, because we recognize that many retirees aren't able to afford to retire and may be able to pick up either part-time work or otherwise, and may want to continue their employment but not sacrifice their ability to access pensions. It is an area that we need to look at to make sure that there aren't any loopholes that are being created, but it's the policy objective is to basically do that, to enable older persons who may be, for whatever reason, having to seek early retirement, but then able to or needing to go back to work, can still, that there wouldn't be a conflict between accessing pensions and then the ability to work, which is currently the case in the law now. So we felt we needed to address it. Another area where that has been amended in this particular bill is dealing with transfers of pensions entitlements, as well as the issue of refunds. So I'll deal with the transfers first. So there is changes to the current bill which says that transfers of monies from pension plan from a local pension plans to any overseas transfers, is that the member, in order for persons to be able to do that going forward, as is proposed, is that the member's employment must be terminated. So they must be no longer working for that particular employer and paying pensions accordingly, that there's no contributions to the pension account for 3 years, and a member must be absent from the island for 3 years. And again, the rationale for the change in this area is basically to minimize the ability to access pension benefits for purposes not intended for pension, and then subsequently, returning to the islands, and then either, becoming wards of the state or otherwise, if they do end up getting permanent residency or any sort of permanent tenure to the country. And there is a change also in the bill which reflects portability between the public and private sector pension plans. Currently, there is no ability to, if you move between public and private sector employment, there is no ability to move from a private sector pension regime into the public sector. There is an ability to move the other way around. This amendment does actually make that portability able, so people can basically move between public and private sector and port, their pension contributions accordingly. So the transfer section that I spoke about with respect to the 3-year limitation is only to do with persons who transfer outside the jurisdiction. And also with respect to the issue of refunds, previously you were able to get a refund of a lump sum in the event that you do transfer overseas. Now there is a requirement that such transfers need to be to a reputable type of registered retirement, either savings plan or pension plan, analogous to what we have here in the Cayman Islands. Again, making sure that monies that are being transferred out of the jurisdiction are being utilized for pensions as was intended for, having pension contributions to begin with. And the only caveat to the refund is, which still exists, or which exists now and will still exist in the current bill, is anything at the administrator's discretion, anything less than $5,000 would allow you would get a refund for as well. And I would of course ask the director and both Ms. Amy to fill in any of the salient details that you think you might want to draw out on this particular instance, because I know this has caused some consternation amongst the public because there was confusion about what is being proposed. So that's generally the changes in principle, but I think it might be useful to kind of talk about some more of the details, and I'll ask them to draw that out.
Certainly, we have about 4 minutes before we go to the headline news, so should be sufficient time to get some in.
Certainly. Thank you, sir. Just one quick point in that right now the 6-month requirement that you have to be not legal and ordinary resident on the island to be able to access your pension is certainly not in the public interest, because folks can actually go away from the territory. Once they had their pension inactive for 2 years, they can go away for 6 months and a day and apply to get their money. Mm-hmm. Once they get it, they can return to the island, and that really is not good retirement planning. So the 3 years being absent is certainly a good belts and braces, and it certainly is more consistent with long-term retirement planning. People may not like it, some people may not like it, but it's in their best interest.
That's the rationale why it's being introduced, because the way the legislation is currently worded, you're required to terminate employment, you're required to have no contributions to your account for 2 years, and then you're required to be off island for 6 months. So the way the change the amendment bill proposes makes it more consistent. So it's you're no contributions to your account, but you're also off island. So therefore, those two are consistent, and then it fulfills the obligation or the intention, which is to ensure the money is actually used for its purpose. It stays here until such time as it's eligible to be transferred.
Okay.
And sorry, there's one other. There's in addition to the 5,000 minimum. Say if you only have $5,000 in your pension, there is a discretion that can be utilized to give a refund, so to speak. The only other opportunity that would be allowed in terms of getting cash as opposed to having to transfer it to another type of investment product or a retirement investment product is if a member reaches the age of normal pension entitlement, which would be 65 years old, and wants to but is unable to transfer their pension benefit to an approved overseas pension plan or pension entitlement savings account. So if they go to a jurisdiction that no such type of pension regime is in place, of course they would need to access their pensions monies. They have reached pension age, so they would be then entitled to get their refund, so to speak, their cash as it relates to pensions, because again they will have reached the threshold of being at pension age, and you would assume then that they would be using it for pension purposes.
Okay, very quickly, in terms of fines, are there any provisions? These fines, when they're assessed, they go into general revenue. Have you looked at the possibility of maybe splitting the fine so that some of it will actually go into pensions, so where it was committed?
We would love that.
Sort of provocative, but
that's a policy issue. That'd be great. Thank you very much for that suggestion.
And I'm making a note of it as we speak.
But one of the things that we want to say also when you asked a question earlier about enforcement and fines is that the administrative fines, clause 79A of the bill gives the director, deputy director, or any pensions officer the power of a constable under the police law for when imposing administrative fines. In other words, when actually delivering them and imposing them. Not powers of a police officer for everything, but just for that. So again, if we have those fines in place, it'll mean you'll be able to get the evidence, determine a breach, impose a fine as immigration does now, and you don't have to go through the long rigmarole of Department of Public Prosecutions and the courts and waiting for years and years on legal gymnastics and everything to take place. And we'll be able to get justice and get people their money in a timely basis.
Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I am your host, Art Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, we have the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs. We also have with us Ms. Amy Wollaston and Mr. Mario Ebanks. We're going to a commercial break at this point in time. And when we come back, we will continue with our discussions. Please stay tuned. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record, where we're discussing the Pensions Amendment Bill with the Honorable Tara Rivers, Miss Amy Wollaston, and Mr. Mario Ebanks. Before I hand back over to the Minister, just want to look at the section relating to the National Pensions Board. I think that is it part 14? And it establishes the Department of Labor and Pensions, and it repeals the Office of the Superintendent of Pensions. So we will no longer have a Superintendent of Pensions, which does that mean now that the Director of the Department of Labor and Pensions will also it'll all be rolled up into one?
Correct, exactly. So the role of superintendent the title, let's put it that way, will simply be removed from the legislation, and the director and the amendment will introduce both the Department of Labor and Pensions as well as the position of director, and the director will assume the responsibilities that the superintendent previously had.
Okay.
So pray for the new director. But at the same time, there will be transitional arrangements or whatever the lawyers, like the minister calls it, grandfathering of all the decisions that were made previously by the superintendent, so that they are whole.
Yeah, I mean, the way that the department is structured and should be managed is that there is two kind of streams. So you have the director, and then there should be the deputy directors, one for labor, one for pensions, and then, of course, pensions officers and whatnot falling under that. So the role really of the superintendent of pensions would then fall within that pensions stream, so to speak. And of course, the director would then have to be responsible for determining who does what and with the management of the department in that regard. But again, that's the structure which was set up, prior to us taking office. We just felt we needed to actually make it work given the legislation, and the legislation needs to reflect the reality. And of course, we have significantly increased the resources to the department as a result since taking office as well, recognizing that there is obviously always challenges of resourcing across the government, but in particular this was an area where we as a government, and certainly myself as minister, felt we needed to invest more resources. And so since May of 2013 we've actually increased the resources dedicated to the department by 10 persons, and I think we have an additional person who will be recruited to assist with the implementation of the minimum wage regime once we get that off the ground next year in March, as the government has committed to do so. So we certainly recognize that, resourcing is always a challenge. And so by trying to tackle the issues of resourcing as well as issues as it relates to legislation and how we can strengthen the compliance mechanisms within the legislation, which we've just been talking about, the fines, the increased transparency, the increased reporting obligations, that will hopefully deal with some of these legacy issues as it relates to lack of enforcement or, pension legislation breaches going forward.
Thanks for that, Minister.
Yeah, so we're just basically aligning the labour and pension laws and making it workable, because right now we have two laws and we had two different structures. But I also just want to say very briefly that the National Pension Board are to be thanked as well. We thank them, and the Minister does, for their service. Over the years, this is one board that they don't even get a stipend because it's not in the law, and they're good, hard-working people and add a lot of value. And I just want to publicly say again, thank you to all the members of the National Pension Board for their voluntary spirit.
Absolutely, and I think we've certainly, from a governance perspective, we and I look very closely to the department and to the director and any recommendations coming forward from them, given that they work very closely with the National Pensions Board, and I understand the relationship with the board in that regard has been quite good, and we've actually strengthened the positions on the board since taking office. We've actually got a few more investment professionals who actually understand, in detail how the kind of investment world works, coupled with the other kind of expertise reflected on the National Pensions Board. So hopefully that will help to even increase their ability to continue to provide the guidance and support to the department as necessary.
Yeah, Minister, I'm just going to take us off topic a little bit, but not really way off topic. Last week I took a look at the British Virgin Islands news, their Platinum News, that's a news service there, and I saw where you made a courtesy call on Minister Ron Skelton, he's the minister responsible for health and social development in the British Virgin Islands. And you not only had the opportunity to discuss gender affairs with him, but also some issues relating to pensions, and you were able to get some insight in terms of their pension scheme over there as well.
Absolutely, and just to put a little bit of context on that visit, I was actually in the BVI over the past week for the 40th Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's regional meeting. I also participated as a presenter and a facilitator at that meeting, but also at the Commonwealth Women's Parliamentary meeting, which took place the day before the general meeting took place. So that was actually a very interesting experience for myself, but also I was able to kind of tell the Cayman Islands story, what we're doing in the areas of looking at gender equality and moving the gender agenda forward. But in particular, my meeting with Minister Skelton was twofold. Him being Minister both of Gender Affairs as well as Pensions, I took the opportunity to have a discussion on both. And so it was interesting to learn that they have had a pension regime now in place for over 35 years, but it is a national pension scheme. So whereas we in the Cayman Islands adopted, when pensions was introduced, a scheme that's kind of run by the private sector through private pension investments, they have a national social security plan or type of regime. So we talked about some of the differences and some of the challenges that each type of pension scheme entails. But also, we did have a very detailed discussion about some of the issues that they're tackling with respect to gender, and domestic violence being one of their key platforms as well. So I was able to share a lot of information that what we're doing, but also hear from them in terms of the kinds of technical expertise and experience that they have working with the University of the West Indies at the St. Augustine campus and otherwise. And similar to my courtesy call with Minister Skelton, I also had a meeting with the Minister of Education over there, as well as the Minister of Labour. And again, talking, because we have, these major reforms on the way currently in the three important areas of our economy, I also had the opportunity to have detailed discussions with my counterpart ministers, and it was very interesting to hear what they're doing in the world of education as labor as well, and just looking at the differences in the structures. So it was very beneficial from that perspective. I think that I've gained a lot, obviously, as minister, being able to kind of see what's happening in the region. Some of the issues are the same, different place, same types of issues, but also looking at some of the ways that we've decided to tackle them, and also that information sharing, I think, was very useful on both parts. So that just strengthening that kind of network was really the key purpose of these type of conferences. And so I definitely took advantage of being able to meet with my counterparts and have these detailed discussions. So
certainly. Okay. Want to return to the amendment bill now, because there's so much to talk about. We won't be able to cover it here, but at least we want to get to
therefore we want people
points.
to come out to the meetings. That's the purpose.
Yes.
I mean, we certainly want to talk about as many of them as we can today, but of course the public meetings are designed to just do that, to go into more detail with each of the provisions, but also give the public an opportunity to ask their questions and to have more pointed discussions as a result.
Right.
So we spoke about the transfers and the refund realm. We also talked about the voluntary contribution scheme, which we've amended, which will hopefully stimulate the kinds of investment or the kinds of savings that we want people to start to develop habits for, because of course now in the event of an emergency they can access their additional voluntary contributions. We also want to discuss the fact that the amendment bill now expressly provides that pension plan administrators must take action to collect delinquent contributions. If that delinquent and if the delinquency is not resolved, then it will be reported to the director. So again, it puts a kind of proactive obligation on administrators to chase up the delinquencies that may be by employers failing to make contributions. So the pension plans now need to stay vigilant with respect to the pension administration in that regard. And of course, where their efforts are not being resolved, then they would then have to report this to the director as well. So again, it's a way to make sure that we keep the regulators keep a finger on the pulse as to what's happening with respect to pensions compliance or delinquency. And the pension plan administrator may also choose to publish the names of employers whose delinquent contributions have not been received. So again, it gives them the power now in the event that, in their efforts to get compliance from employers with respect to pension contributions, if they're not dealing with that in a way, then they can actually publish that. And again, if the delinquency is not resolved, it must be reported to the director and in writing to the relevant employees. So the employees also are now given an opportunity to know, that their pension contributions are not being made on their behalf. So again, it's to try to address this issue of employees saying, well, I've been paying my pensions, they've been deducting my pensions on a monthly basis. I assumed that they were paying the contributions. So in this event where contributions aren't being made and those issues aren't resolved, that reporting must take place to the director, but also to the employees themselves. So that is a way to try to address, as I said, some of the issues about non-compliance and the lack of requirements around this type of reporting mechanism, which this bill does introduce, and I would expect would have a very positive effect on trying to address that concern. I don't know if there's anything that they would want to add in this.
I just want to point out an issue. The Two things. First of all, the when the delinquency is reported to the directors, also reported to the members. Therefore, the relevant employees will definitely be informed that way. In addition to that provision, there's also a provision that increases the frequency of statements. So currently, the National Pensions Law only requires statements to be issued annually, but what we've changed it to is quarterly. So between the reporting of the delinquency to the members in writing, if there is a problem, as well as the frequency of the increasing of the frequency of the statements, the two together should address the issue of employees being aware of what's going on with the payment of their contributions. In addition to that, the increasing the statements also allows a greater opportunity for the members to know about what's going on with the plan specifically. So they have an opportunity to A, know about what's going on with the payment from the employer, and B, what's going on with the plan, and that's from the pension plan administrator. So that those two actions address multiple things.
Okay. Ms. Ebanks, anecdotally, do the issues in terms of non-payment of pensions or not paying into the pensions plan by employees, does that rest mainly with small employers, or do we have problems with the more established employers as well?
Mostly with the smaller employers, but we keep a list of the top 20% of the non-compliant, and there are some large employers in there too. But the issue with large employers is, for example, some of them may be late within a 4-to-5 day cycle, but within days of passing that cycle, they're current again. So if you look at that 20%, you will see a large amount, but it doesn't really go long term. But the long term ones, some of those go back for a number of years, and it's mostly small businesses. And some of the businesses have closed or downsized. And we're actually going through a process now trying to rationalize all of those and to see what could be done in terms of collections and working with the administrators and working with these people to do payment plans. I mean, the officers in the National Pensions Office, the department's pensions unit or pensions division, they spend an awful amount of time trying to work with these folks to bring them into compliance as opposed to prosecution, because it takes a long time and whatnot. But mostly it's small businesses. And, talking about that, I mean, for example, somebody just said to me a couple of weeks ago, but I think it was last week, that the government is increasing the year's maximum pensionable earnings figure from 60,000 to 87,000. So this business say, well, as an employee, we have to pay 27,000 more a year. And I said, no, that's not correct. Basically, employers on $60,000 of income per employee, the pension bill is $6,000 per year, split 50-50. The employee pays half, which is $3,000. The employer pays half, which is $3,000. At $87,000, the 10% of that is $8,700. So the employee will pay $4,350, and the employer pays $4,350 per year. So it's only $1,350 each of them increase per year for pension. So it's not going to be a tremendous burden, and it's also going to add to social benefit for all of us.
Okay. Folks, I want to remind you that you're listening to For the Record. I'm your host, Dorit Connor. My guest in the studio with me this morning, we have the Honorable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs. We also have with us Ms. Amy Wollaston and Mr. Mario Ebanks. We're going to our last commercial break. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but if we go over the time, I'm sure if the minister can continue to be here, that hopefully management will understand, because this is extremely important. So please stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record, where we are discussing the Pensions Amendment Bill with Minister Honorable Tara Rivers, as well as Ms. Amy Wollaston and Mr. Mario Ebanks. One of our listeners has sent a message and asks, what happens to persons currently in the workforce when the age of retirement changes to 65? Will they have to work up to age 65 to get their full benefits?
Well, there will be there will be some transitional provisions that will be put in place in order to basically address persons who, by the time the law comes into force, would be kind of within that age of retirement based on current law. So there would need to be provisions that really kind of allow for that transitional type of application to make sure that we don't disenfranchise to the extent possible persons who would be, say, at 60 or thereat when the law comes into play. I don't know if there's anything that Amy would want to add to that in that regard, or I think that's something that the ministry will be looking at, actually making sure that does get into the final bill before that goes to the House for adoption is what will happen in that regard. So we certainly are aware that needs to be addressed, and that persons may be at the 60 or maybe even just after 60 by the time the law is passed and come into force. So that will certainly be taken into consideration during the kind of transitional provisions that the director spoke of previously.
Okay. One of the things we haven't been able to do on For the Record yet is to slow the clock down. So we're getting almost to that time of the morning again. And so I'm going to hand over to you, Minister. And at some point in time, we want to remind our listeners about the meetings that take place. They probably won't be able to remember all of the meetings. So the ones that are coming closer to time, we can remind them.
I'll remind them. There is one tonight at the Northside Civic Centre at 8 o'clock, and that's to deal with the Pension Amendment Bill. We have one coming up on Thursday at Savannah Primary School Hall at 7:30. Again, to talk about the bill. And of course there is next week, and I, of course, being the representative from West Bay, want to stress that we do have a meeting on next week, Wednesday the 12th of August at the Shirley Kidd Memorial Hall at Sir John Icumba Primary School at 7:30. And then, of course, there's East End and Georgetown next week as well. So, but for the benefit of the viewing public, East End's is on Monday the 10th at 8, and Georgetown is on Thursday the 13th of August at 7:30 p.m.
Okay. Mr. Mario, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about the labor, amendments as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. O.C. Just a couple of quick points. There was a presentation made at the Chamber of Commerce Be Informed session by HSM Chambers, and there's 2 points that came up that I just wanted to quickly try to clarify. Section 6.1 of the existing law, and it hasn't changed in the bill, says that every employer who enters into a contract of employment with an employee other than a casual employee should, within a certain amount of time, present the employee with a written statement of conditions of employment. Now, at that session, the presenters were trying to say that 2 documents were required, a contract of employment and also a statement of working conditions. But when you look at the definitions of contract of employment and conditions of service, you'll see that there's only basically one document that's required. Because the contract of employment means basically any agreement or understanding. When you'd say to somebody, by maybe an offer letter, we're offering you this job, but it's subject to a contract. Then the contract then is actually where you go into the details in terms of providing all that is outlined in Section 6.2 of the current law and the bill. So I just want to make it clear to employers that they don't have to be scared thinking that they have to produce two documents. Basically, it's one. So in other words, the contract of employment is the engagement. The statement of working conditions is the marriage. That's the difference, but it's only one, right? Then there's another point that was made at that session where people in attendance were scared and they almost started a riot in the room when they were told that if you don't have a statement of working conditions or a contract, which is the same, there is a fine of $10,000, and they were told it's $10,000 per employee. And I could see the temperature in the room. I could feel the temperature rising within seconds. But it's $10,000 fine proposed in the bill, but it's a $10,000 fine for the company. It's not per employee. But again, the point that we want to make is that if people follow the law, there'll be no concern about fines or penalties.
Precisely.
And the government, being a reasonable government, which those presenters should have known, are not going to impose this law today and then start to impose fines tomorrow. There will be a transitional period, and so I just want to make those points because it's causing quite a bit of concern within the business community.
Okay, Minister, I'm going to hand back over to you.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the purpose, and as you've pointed out, this may not necessarily be the norm with respect to all types of legislation with regards to public consultation, but we certainly felt as a government and as minister it was important to have extensive public consultation on these laws because of the fact, they haven't been amended in such a long period of time. The attempt to actually have an amended labor regime has been over 10 years now, and then pensions really hasn't been since inception about 20 years ago. So we felt it was important to actually reach out to as many stakeholders directly, as well as giving the wider public, an opportunity to have their say by coming out to the public meetings, again, because we want to hear from the public. So we certainly are not averse to hearing people's views, whether it be complimentary, whether it be endorsing what we're doing, or whether it be expressing concerns about what we're doing. This is the whole point of why we're doing what we're doing. We as a government feel it is time that we need to review and revise and amend our labour relations regime as it relates to the legislation, but also our pension and our regulatory regime as it relates to pension. It's time for those changes that we've been proposing to take place as well. But we certainly want to make sure people feel empowered to have their say and to actually shape what the final product will be. We've had some very good suggestions from some very good comments, some very helpful, and that's the whole point, is that we really are looking for constructive criticism, as well as I said, if you are in agreement and you think this is certainly where we as a country need to go, we want to hear that as well, because that, of course, then gives us the ability to speak authoritatively and say, we have heard from the public, there was a resounding call to keep this, there was a resounding call to actually move this law forward, or these bills forward, and therefore it's really a way for us as a community to get the kind of changes collectively to benefit all employers, employees, and other relevant stakeholders that will be impacted and affected. So I really want people to just take advantage of the opportunity that we are affording them as a government, and coming out to the meetings, submitting your comments in writing, or participating in the individual stakeholder meetings, which we are arranging as well. Because I think in the end, we will end up with a product, or with products of these various pieces of legislation that the ministry has out for consultation. They'll be stronger, and we'll be able to stand by it. And as a country, we'll be able to hopefully move it forward in a more efficient manner.
Okay, Ms. Amy, anything to add?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for having us on the show and giving us this opportunity to explain all the provisions that are in the amendment bill. Of course, we didn't cover everything, but I think we covered a good summary of some of them. And again, I'd like to encourage the public to come out to the district meetings. And if you can't do that, then of course you can always provide your input in writing using the email address of lpl@gov.ky.
Okay, and Mr. Mario.
And also we'll have nice refreshments at the public meetings as well. So
I'll
that
get
always
them.
helps. People don't have to worry about rushing home to get something to eat. They can just come to the meetings, and we have some healthy snacks there as well. And finally, from my point of view, the bill also sets up a letters of good standing arrangement where, under the culture of compliance, employers are going to have to get a letter of good standing from pensions to show they're complying in order to get their business license renewed. So that's another piece of enforcement mechanism that is going to add to the culture of compliance and to build social and economic strength in the territory.
Okay, before we go, I'm going to impose on you one more time in relation to our listeners' question in relation to what happens to persons currently in the workforce when they reach the retirement age, when it changes to 65, and whether or not they will have to work up to 65 to get their full benefits. Someone else has sent me a text asking if we can basically repeat, the explanation there on that.
It really, like I said, there will be transitional provisions put in place to address the issue of those persons who are at retirement age or exceeding retirement age by the time, or the current retirement age, that is, by the time that the legislation is brought into force. So that will be outlined specifically in those transition provisions.
Okay. And Minister, final words for you.
Yes, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for having this engaging discussion, and thank you for the allowing us to go into detail that we have. I do encourage, as I said, everyone to come out to the public meetings if you're able to come. And also thank you for the listening public. Thank you to the viewing public. And also, this is a very exciting opportunity for us. It's a very exciting part of our history in the country. We have reached a crossroads in many instances, and certainly in the area of employment and labor relations and pensions and education. I mean, we have been very proactive in trying to not just address these issues, but figuring out how to tackle them and how to address them in a way that is going to be acceptable by most. But there will be the ultimate products of this consultation. I can't sit here and promise that it'll be all things to all people. We will be people that think we haven't gone far enough. There will be people that think that we've gone too far. I mean, that's just the nature of these types of legislation and this type of regime. But what we do aim to have is to try to address the known areas of concern and to not just, take an approach that things will just resolve themselves without actually having to look at what we need to do as a country, as a people. It will require sacrifices on all fronts, but obviously as a government, we're prepared to take the lead in actually addressing these issues directly and head on. And I want to say thank you to my colleagues in government for the support to actually be able to put these out thus far, but also thank you to the ministry staff, thank you to the director, thank you to Amy, thank you to everyone that has really pulled together these presentations, this draft legislation, like legal drafting. And I just want to say, I hope everyone has a very productive and a prosperous week.
Thank you. We got one more caller. The person isn't online now, but and I think you may have answered this question before, but they wanted to know they're on a work permit and they're leaving the island. How do they go about getting their pension? So, Ms. Amy or Mr. Mario?
Well,
if there's a terminal illness or emergency, yeah.
Well, first of all, they have to visit the administrator, and the administrator will guide them through whether terminal illness is a Section 40 application, which they'll know what to do with it. If it's strictly early retirement, there's a separate process. So their first step is to go to the administrator, and that administrator will guide them through the process.
Thank you. Folks, I want to remind you that you've been listening to For the Record. I have had the pleasure to be your host, and we've had in the studio with us this morning discussing the Pensions Amendment Bill, the Honourable Tara Rivers, Minister responsible for Education, Employment and Gender Affairs. Also with us, Ms. Amy Wollaston and Mr. Mario Ebanks. I want to thank you all for allowing us into your homes, into your offices or places of work, into your vehicles as you traverse the roads of the Cayman Islands. I want to remind you all that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. There's always someone out there who's less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then you should donate to a worthy charity. We should always consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. I also want to extend thanks to our sponsors. For the Record was brought to you by Digicel Top Up, where you can send minutes to your loved ones in Jamaica from a Digicel retail location or top-up kiosk, and they will receive double credits plus 7 free days of data when you send $20 or more. And also For the Record has been brought to you by Finance and Corporate Services Cayman, also known as FinCor. FinCor provides superior accounting and bookkeeping services to small and medium-sized businesses. They are located at Unit Number 9, Paddington Place on Godfrey Nixon Way in Georgetown. They can be reached on their telephone numbers 746-9272 or 325-8849. You can also check them out on www.fincor.ky because they are client-focused, technology-driven, and cost-effective. I want to encourage you to continue to listen to your radio station, Radio Cayman. You can join Sterling Dwayne Banks at 12 noon today, and of course you can listen to the beautiful music that will be played by Miss Susan Watson after For the Record as well. I say to you, have a great day, stay safe, and God bless.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.